and welcome to Jesuitical, a podcast from American Media for saints and sinners. You can join us each week for honest conversations about the Catholic Church and our world today, sometimes over drinks. I'm Ashley McKinless, and I'm joined by Zach Davis.
Great to be with you, Ashley.
How you feeling? Couple days to go before the marathon.
I am ready.
Yeah?
I am ready for it to be over. I don't know, the anticipation, this is very much like an Advent kind of week.
Yeah.
Like the waiting for the big event. Especially because you're not really like running or doing anything. It is just like this period of anticipation.
And if you don't know, Zach is running the New York City Marathon, your first marathon.
First, last, only. We'll see.
And we're going to get more into the spirituality of running in general, running in a marathon, with our colleague Jackson Goodman, who is going to join us in studio for As One Friend Speaks to Another at the end of the show.
That's right, our face-sharing segment. But before that, we have a very spooky episode.
Yes, we are talking about the Book of Revelation, which I just reread. It's just as weird as I remember it being when I read it in college. And so we're bringing on a scripture scholar. His name is Micah Kiel. He's a professor of New Testament at St. John's School of Theology and Seminary in Collegeville, Minnesota, and an expert on the Book of Revelation.
Yeah, anytime a reading from the Book of Revelation comes through, either like in my normal prayer or in the mass readings, I just kind of like toss my hands up like, I'm not going to get this. There's like symbolism, dragons and beasts and plagues. And
Yeah.
I've just sort of like resigned myself to not really understanding what's happening. But that changes today.
Yes.
Micah Kiel is going to lead us through what the Book of Revelation is actually about and why we are still all confused about it.
But first, we have Signs of the Times, the part of our show where we sift through the Catholic news of the week so you don't have to. What's our first story, Zach?
So last week, Pope Leo and King Charles III made history. This is the first time that a Pope and a British royal have prayed together since the Church of England broke off from Rome in the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah.
It was like, of all places.
Yeah, so it was pretty incredible to see the King and the Pope praying together in such a storied and theologically important place for the Catholic Church. This came as part of a two-day state visit. King Charles and Queen Camilla met with Pope Leo and other officials at the Vatican. They had a special meeting where they were joined by representatives from climate organizations in the business world to talk about care of creation and sustainable development, which has been an issue that King Charles has been dedicated for decades, and obviously is a priority for Pope Leo too.
Yeah, and they also did a prayer service. The King and the Queen went to St. Paul outside the walls, which is just one of my favorite basilicas in Rome. And I didn't know this. There's actually a connection to the English monarchy. Evidently, in the late Middle Ages, English kings were considered protectors of that church, which is built. It's built over the tomb of St. Paul, and it is still around today because it's not located in Britain, and therefore the Brits couldn't destroy it when they destroyed all their other beautiful Catholic churches.
Protectors of it. Yeah. But despite that rocky history between the Catholic Church and the Church of England, at the ceremony at St. Paul's, the king was welcomed as a royal confrater, that is a royal member of the Brotherhood of St. Paul's Basilica and Abbey. And in addition to that honor, he was a special chair was made for him to sit in that had his royal coat of arms and the motto Ut Unum Sint, which means that they may be one. It's also the title of Pope John Paul II's encyclical on Christian unity. So a lot of symbolism there.
Yeah, in this visit, that you have the head of the Church of England visiting with the Pope, it comes at an interesting time in terms of Christian unity, especially within the Anglican communion, because they're experiencing their own problems with unity at this point.
Yeah, so recently the next Archbishop of Canterbury was announced, and for the first time ever, it's going to be a woman, and that has caused some consternation, especially in the Anglican communion in the Global South, so Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia, who actually back in 2008 created the Global Anglican Future Conference as kind of like its own gathering movement within the Anglican communion, and that was in the wake of the first openly gay archbishop being made in the Episcopal Church of the United States. So there had been this tension between the church in England and the United States and Canada and then in other parts of the world. And this really, I guess, brought it to a breaking point. And so they announced a week after the new Archbishop of Canterbury was announced that they would be formally breaking from the Church of England, and had said that they're not leaving the communion; they are the communion. So there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, and it just is a reminder that the work for Christian unity is as much progress as we've made in recent decades. Like fractures continue to happen throughout the Christian denominations. But we should add that at least in the Catholic Anglican dialogue that that's continuing. The dialogue's continuing. The Vatican sent a note of welcome to Archbishop Sarah Malele, who is, as you mentioned, going to be the first woman Archbishop of Canterbury. So it's complicated, but it doesn't really add any complexity to that ecumenical situation that wasn't already there. So that work is ongoing between the Vatican and the Anglican Communion, and we will be watching. What's our next story, Ashley?
Our next story comes from South Dakota, where the bishop and a Jesuit community are pushing back on a decision from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth to retain the medals of honor that were given to soldiers who participated in a massacre at Wounded Knee in the 19th century that killed hundreds of indigenous civilians.
Yeah, so a little bit of context here. In 2024, Joe Biden's Secretary of Defense commissioned a report to re-examine the decision to bestow medals of honor, which is our nation's highest military decoration, on the soldiers at Wounded Knee. And fast forward a little bit, Pete Hegseth has said that a panel found that the soldiers should keep their medal and that his predecessor didn't make a final determination in the interest of historical accuracy, but in terms of being politically correct. So a politicized decision at that level, but the bishop in South Dakota and the Jesuit community there, they clearly disagree with this reversal.
Yeah, they say the facts of history are on their side, and I think most historians agree. There was a general who was there, and just days after the massacre, described it as the most abominable criminal military blunder and a horrible massacre of women and children. And this was women and children and also civilian men who are part of the Lakota tribe, who are located in that area, Pine Ridge Reservation, where this is where it happened, is a place where the Jesuits are deeply involved, and that's why they're involved in this statement.
Yeah, I appreciated them sticking up for their people and, reminding Catholics that, there's nothing particularly Catholic or American about rewarding or awarding war crimes, and that we should be standing against that. And so I'm appreciative of the Lakota people and also the Jesuits in South Dakota and the bishop there as well. What's our final story, Ashley?
Yeah, so last Saturday, Cardinal Raymond Burke, he's an American cardinal who was known for his fierce criticism of Pope Francis, was able to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass in St. Peter's Basilica with the permission of Pope Leo as part of a pilgrimage of Catholics devoted to the Latin Mass that's happened every year since 2012.
That's right. And so this Mass happens. There's hundreds of people there. It seems like there were more people than they expected, so there was some standing room that had to be accommodated. And this is a watershed moment in Catholic news for a few reasons, I think. One is, what is Pope Leo going to do with the Latin Mass? And is he going to take up sort of Pope Francis's legacy of imposing restrictions on it, or is he going to maybe tack back a little bit? It's sort of seen as an early indicator of where his papacy is going to go.
Yeah, that's right, because after 2021 and Pope Francis put these restrictions on the Latin Mass, this pilgrimage group was not allowed to have the Mass in St. Peter's Basilica in the year.
Well, technically, they had the Mass in 2021 and 2022 after Pope Francis's restrictions. And then there are differing reports as to whether Pope Francis didn't let them or they didn't even feel comfortable asking in 2023 and 2024. Yeah. I feel like I've seen differing reports on there, but they definitely had the Mass in 21 and 22.
Do you know if they had it in the main area? Because after 2021, Pope Francis's rule was that the Latin Mass could only be said in the Clementine Chapel, which is down below.
No, and I guess that's a good point, because this Mass in particular is at the altar of the chair. This is sort of like the main altar in St. Peter's Basilica. It's front and center. It's sort of the heart of Roman Catholicism in a lot of ways. And that's where Cardinal Burke got permission to celebrate the Mass in 2025.
Right. And during his homily, he spent a lot of time talking about Pope Benedict's document that expanded access to the Latin Mass.
Summorum Pontificum.
Yes, that's what this pilgrimage is named after, which is interesting because that document has been abrogated by Pope Francis's document Traditionis Custodes.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I think you could be watch this Mass happen. And one takeaway you could have from it is that this is why Pope Francis restricted the use of the Latin Mass. I don't doubt the sincerity of the people who believe there, and when they say how much they get out of this form of liturgy. I don't think that I am any more Catholic than they are. But when you look at this, and this like referring to a teaching document that has been abrogated, that's no longer valid, as if Pope Francis never existed or the Traditionis Custodes never came out, like they're just trying to walk that back. It feels a lot like trying to pray in a liturgy as if Vatican II had never happened and that the reforms of the Roman Rite had never happened. Also, I was struck by this moment in the Mass where there was a 97-year-old cardinal who got up and delivered an exorcism prayer in the middle of the Mass, which I don't know. I think you could read that in a lot of ways, but I think one way is that it was meant to send a message, maybe not by everybody there, but by some, that there needed to be something exorcised from the Vatican, partly because maybe they weren't allowed to celebrate their expression of the liturgy there.
I have seen some reports there were recent desecrations of the altar in St. Peter's. A man urinated on it, so that could be the reason.
But there are like rites already have been performed to address that stuff.
That's true,
right? So the truth is, we don't really know. Yeah. I found it a little weird and strange.
But going back to what this says about how Pope Leo is going to approach this. So in addition to him granting permission for this Mass, we got some hints from his first interview that was conducted over the summer with Elise Allen of Crux. In that, he acknowledged that after his election, he received letters and requests from people who are devoted to the traditional Latin Mass. And so he's aware of it being an issue. He said, "I'm not sure where that's going to go. It's obviously very complicated." So that's not like a clear indication of what's
and
going
like
to happen.
He gave his explicit permission for this Mass to happen. I would just say if this was the traditional Latin Mass group's audition for how they're going to behave if they get more permission, I'm not sure that they're gonna pass that audition. So we'll see. I'm not the Pope. Pope Leo's, and he's gonna have to decide.
Now stick around for our conversation with Micah Kiel about why you should take the Book of Revelation seriously, but not literally. Joining us from Collegeville, Minnesota, is Micah Kiel. Micah is a professor of New Testament at St. John's School of Theology and Seminary and the author of Apocalyptic Ecology, the Book of Revelation, the Earth, and the Future. Welcome to Jesuitical, Micah.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And happy Halloween to you. This is when this episode comes out.
This is our spooky
Good.
episode, because Revelation has to be the spookiest book in the Bible.
Perfect. It absolutely should be. Yes.
And we have a spooky drink that Ashley has concocted for us here. This is a Halloween margarita.
Halloween margarita. So basically a margarita with apple cider, which is quite delicious.
Not
and
so
a blood
bad.
Orange for garnish.
Blood orange for spookiness.
Very nice.
And I understand you have something.
I do have a beer,
also.
and our brewery here is right next to a monastery, and it's titled Bad Habit.
Oh my gosh. I love
So
that.
nice double entendre there. So
That's perfect. Well, hey, cheers. Thanks
Cheers.
for coming
cheers.
on
Thank
today.
you. Thank you.
So I got to admit, whenever I see the Book of Revelation pop up in Mass, I kind of just commit to checking out. Like initially, like I would see it and I'd be like, oh, that's kind of fun. There's some dragons and beasts and plagues, but I found it pretty impenetrable in terms of trying to understand it, or better yet, get something spiritually meaningful out of it. So I'm really excited for you to wake me from my dogmatic slumber and open me up to the joys of Revelation. First question, who wrote this book?
Who wrote this book? Yeah. So quite often when you ask a scholar a question like that about a biblical book, we say, we have no idea. In
Isn't
this,
that funny though? Because like that seems true for a lot of books in the Bible, and
yeah,
yet we all kind of in normal parish life just like walk around talking as if it is the same John who wrote the Gospel of
yeah,
John.
yeah. So in this particular case, that there is the author tells us his name right at the beginning, I, John. And so we take that seriously as the name of the author. Now, John, back then, as it is today, super common name. The tradition within the church is that this is the same John as the Gospel of John and the epistles of John and the story of that person taking Mary into his home in Ephesus, etc. Uh, that part of the story scholars really don't follow. We think this is some other John, uh, important figure in early Christianity, clearly seems to be focused in this area of Turkey, kind of in Western Asia Minor. Um, there's a cluster of 7 cities there that he mentions at the beginning of the book, and so we think it's somebody who's probably some kind of early Christian leader who lived in that part of the world.
And is he writing around the time of Jesus? After?
Yeah, a little bit later, probably toward the end of the 1st century.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the Bible, I think a lot of people get tripped up because it's made up of so many like literary genres. And if you read some things literally, that's not how it was intended when it was written, you can go to some weird places. So this is a genre of apocalyptic literature, which I think is especially hard for us moderns because it's not a genre like poetry, say, that exists that much today.
But funny enough, like apocalyptic film and
Thinking and-
books and
that's
thinking,
true.
that's quite common.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But different from maybe what the ancients
Yeah.
had in mind.
It's
Yeah.
with it.
Apocalyptic.
It's with us, but in a different way.
Yeah. So can you situate it within what apocalyptic
Yeah.
literature was back then?
Yeah, we use this word apocalypse and what we mean the end of the world. It's something that's coming, right? And that's really not what it means in the ancient context. The word apocalypse in Greek, the word apocalypsis, means it's the word revelation. That's where this book gets its name. It's a lifting of the veil. Something is being revealed. So in scholarship, when we use the word apocalypse, it's actually a genre of literature. And you're right, they read the book of Revelation and they have no idea how to interpret it. Part of the reason for that is because we don't have a lot of this in the Bible. Parts of the book of Daniel are an apocalypse, and the book of Revelation, these are really the only 2 apocalypses that we have within Scripture. If you look outside of Scripture, there's actually tons of examples of Jewish and Christian apocalypses that exist, but nobody ever reads those. And when you do read them and then you come to Revelation, it makes a lot more sense because you get a sense of, oh, this is what this is, and people did this all the time. It's actually not that unique.
Yeah, I was rereading it before this interview in my old college HarperCollins study Bible, and
Perfect.
I think the footnotes going with each chapter were longer than the chapter,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is I think maybe unique in the Bible.
I thought that meant David Foster Wallace wrote the book,
Could
not
be.
John of Patmos.
but those footnotes, they do give you a lot of hints as to what is going on because there's a whole lot of symbolisms, numbers repeated, that sort of
Yep.
thing. But before we get to the text itself, I want to have some more context. So what was going on in the world John was living in when he wrote this?
Yeah, so it's really important to think about that. And I think to step back 1 second, we might want to ask sort of, why do people write this genre of literature in the first place? Because it helps us understand how to answer that question. And I think the simplest way to understand it is it's literature that's struggling with the problem of evil. Why is there evil? Why is there suffering in the world? That's really what's at the heart of it. And if you think about that, that's really a deeply beautiful, ancient human question. So if we keep that in mind and then think about the book of Revelation in particular, what's going on is a world in which the Roman Empire is exerting control and dominance over many, many aspects of life. And in particular, in the religious realm, a phenomenon called the emperor cult, where people are worshiping the emperor as a god while he's a living human on earth. People are building huge sacrificial complexes, sacrificing to the emperor as a god. And so if you imagine yourself as a Christian in that kind of context, that foists a very difficult question upon you about how can I be part of sort of this civic world in which these things are happening and all of my friends are doing it? and there's a lot of nationalistic pride involved in doing it. But I can't do it because it's idolatry. And so it creates a situation then where Christians were being oppressed, oftentimes severely. And there's clear evidence in the book of Revelation, people were being killed for their faith. So we're not talking about perceived oppression. We're talking about this is an existential crisis for these people. And so in that context, thinking about the problem of suffering is sociologically where we understand apocalyptic literature quite often arises.
One question I have is this book about historical events that were happening around the first century? Is it about a future time that, it's predicting the end of the world? Is it about our current time? Or is it this timeless book that has truths for all ages?
Yes. How you answer each of those, though, is super important.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing is to recognize this book is not a prediction of the future. Okay, this book does not predict Barack Obama, Donald Trump, earthquakes. This is not Nostradamus. And I tell my students this sometimes, anybody who comes to you and tells you that the book of Revelation is predicting the future, you need to run in the opposite direction. Because that person's probably trying to either manipulate you or sell you something.
But that is kind of what it's most known for, particularly in the United States, correct?
Exactly. So this is a problem. This is, a little niche I've carved out for myself in the world. But once we recognize that, it's not a prediction of the future. What it really is grappling with the suffering in its present moment. Now, part of the way it does that is by talking about the future. So it is about the future in a certain sense, but not in a way that it's trying to predict that X, Y, and Z is going to happen. But I think in a broader sense that God ultimately is in control of history. There is justice being worked out in the universe in a realm we cannot see. We can only have access to it because of the revelation. The veil has been lifted, and then we can see the true nature of reality. It unmasks the way in which the elements of the world are demonic and satanic in nature and need to be opposed and resisted. So God's in control of that process. But that's very different from saying that it predicts very specific things that are going to happen at some point in the future.
Can you just give like a very broad overview of like the narrative arc of the book of Revelation so folks can like understand what we're talking about, and then we can get into the specifics of various symbols and prophecies?
Yeah. So in a kind of a very broad outline, the beginning, we get some opening messages from John. He says, I was on the island of Patmos and experienced the suffering. You get an opening vision of Christ with some very particular imagery like the Alpha and Omega, the two-edged sword. Then you get letters to 7 churches that are written. John is told to write these letters to these 7 churches. And these are all towns, cities clustered, like I said, in kind of a particular part of what was back then the Roman province of Asia. And then the real wildness starts. You get a vision of the throne and the 4 creatures that hover around that throne, the 24 elders. And then you get 3 cycles of 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls of wrath. And so you kind of walk through all of the cataclysms that come out of each of those. And then you come to, the earth is thrown into a lake of fire, and then you get a new heaven and a new earth in the very last 2 chapters. So that's kind of a big picture overview of the kind of how the book flows.
So George Bernard Shaw said the book of Revelation was a, quote, curious record of the visions of a drug addict, end quote. What would you say to Mr. Shaw?
This is a really important question because my students go on the internet or the TikTok, as I call it, and they laugh at me. Who's the famous podcaster?
Zach Davis, Ashley McKinless.
Yeah, other than those, the kind of bro dude that all the young men are listening to.
Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan, yeah, sorry. he is really interested in psychedelics and talks a lot about this. So this is on the front of minds of a lot of people who read this book. And I think it's a really dangerous thing to think about, because what's at stake really is kind of our ability to have any kind of experience of the spirit. Can people not have an experience of God without some sort of altered state that's induced by a chemical? I mean, I think that's a really important question.
Mm.
And so I understand why people would joke about it, but we need to think about the way in which this is a really serious kind of revelation that people have in particular moments. It's also, of course, a literary phenomenon at a certain level. Did John really have all of these visions, or did he just write them?
Yeah.
That's a question it's very hard to answer. But in either case, we have to think about him as being inspired, right? Scripture is inspired by God, and God has to be somehow involved in that process.
Well, would people who were living at the same time as John perceive this as being very trippy, or would they have kind of understood the symbols, the language, the genre in a way that, made them not just dismiss John as a
Yeah, that's a
crazy
really good
person?
question. I do think for the most part, not trippy. I think they would have gotten it. Part of the reason we have a hard time understanding a lot of it is, like I said earlier, we haven't read other apocalyptic literature, but we also don't know the Old Testament well enough.
Yeah.
One scholar has said that really the book of Revelation is just a retelling of the Exodus story, but in the heart of the Roman Empire. And so, if you know the Hebrew scriptures really well, a lot of the imagery you're thinking, oh, well, that comes from there, that comes from there. And so you can kind of see those connections more readily. And I think that makes it less weird, because it actually has a familiarity to it, as strange as that sounds. Yeah.
One last question before we maybe decode some of these symbols. In prepping for this, I didn't realize it was kind of a contentious addition to the canon of the Bible. Could you maybe just tell that story, and why it ultimately ended up being included, and whether
Yeah.
people are still on the fence about that?
You can kind of intuit why it was on the fence, right? Why it was on the cutting room floor, because it is strange, it is bizarre. It has, if you're not thinking about what all of that imagery means, you might say we're talking 250 years after it was written, 200 years into the 3rd and 4th century. Some of its original meaning may have been lost by that point. And so people are sort of kind of left with, what do we do with this? I think it ends up in the canon for two reasons. One, it did have a lot of support and usage in some pockets in the early church. Some parts of the early church found it to be very powerful. I think, and this is hard to prove, it had such a dramatic impact on the development of the liturgy that I think that also was sort of a point in its favor of why it eventually did make it in. You think about a lot of the hymns that are in the Eucharistic prayer, a lot of that language comes out of the book of Revelation. A lot of our imagery around Christ as the Lamb comes out of that as well. So I think it's kind of its liturgical cadence, if you will, is another reason why it had some staying power.
So getting into the specifics, you've kind of hinted at this. So big picture, this is like a story of good versus evil. Good is God and Jesus. Bad is, the Roman Empire. Can we talk about what the kind of symbols or descriptions of the Roman Empire are in the book of Revelation, and how they correspond with what was actually going on in John's world?
So if this gets too granular, you stop me.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Because different places can go different areas. But so a really good place to see this is in chapter 6, which is the 4 horsemen, the famous 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And so the first horse is I may not rehearse all these details exactly, but I think the first one is a white horse, and it has a rider on it, and he's carrying a sword. And so the language that's used, or no, sorry, maybe I have that mixed up with the red horse. Well, whatever. One of them has a sword. And the language that John uses there has been connected to a a certain type of capital punishment that was meted out by the Romans, in which they would decapitate people with a huge sword. So the idea there is John is sort of taking this image from the Roman Empire and turning that implement of violence sort of back on them. Another one is the horse with the rider who has a bow, like a bow and arrow. And this is often coordinated with the ancient civilization known as the Parthians. And the Parthians were known as people who were on horseback and were great with the bow, which the Romans were not. And so this is, again, similar kind of idea, something from that Roman context. That's where the image comes from. And then John is turning it into an implement of destruction in his apocalyptic scenarios. And then I've done some work talking about in the fourth horse is given power to sort of destroy the earth. And one of the phrases there is with the wild animals, the wild beasts. And so I make an argument that that should actually be thought of as the reference to the gladiatorial games, what was going on in the Roman arenas, that these beasts that the Romans were extracting from all over the Mediterranean world were being brought into the arena and slaughtered senselessly. But they were big, terrifying creatures, hippos and elephants and giraffes and lions and tigers and bears, oh my. And so they were all in the arena. And again, here John is taking this thing that Rome thought was theirs, that they had control over, and setting it loose.
And so, sorry, these
No.
horses, are they seem like they're on the side of evil because they're like doing these horrible things, but are they actually under the dominion of God in John's mind and the instruments of his judgment
This is
and
sort
punishment?
of my problem with God in the Book of Revelation.
Yeah,
generally,
yes. I was about to say we should have a problem with God, but anyway, here's the deal. It's very subtle, right? And so these horses come out, and I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase. It's called a divine passive. It says power was given to them. He was given a sword. He was given authority. And so throughout the Bible, this is quite common. A divine passive means it's in the passive voice grammatically, but the actor is clearly intended to be God.
God lets it happen somehow, or
I would say it's even a little more than that.
More
I would say
active
the
than
divine
that?
passive means God is more than letting it happen, is somehow involved in making it happen.
okay.
Yeah. And that, of course, is deeply problematic.
Well,
right.
only if you take it literally that God's going to.
Well, yeah, right. But we don't take it literally like that there's going to be 4 horses and that there's going to be blood. But we do need to take literally in this sense that this is a theological description of God that we have to grapple with, right? Why would God do that? And to answer that, I think we need to first go back to sort of this moment of suffering. The people who wrote this book did not sit back and say, you know what, let's write a philosophical treatise about the nature of God. They are dying, right? They are facing an existential crisis. And so in that moment, we have to think about how can they explain both their belief in God's power and the fact that things are going so poorly and terribly for them. And so they do that by having God respond with righteous anger and judgment.
Yeah, I guess the answer they kind of get to is, well, they'll get theirs in when the coming of the kingdom happens.
Yeah.
Which is like, I don't know. Doesn't make me feel great. Is like a Christian response. Should I be uncomfortable? Like, am I wrong to be that uncomfortable with that? Or
no, there's a huge problem with violence in this book. Absolutely. And one way of thinking about it, and I'll turn this on myself, not on you, because I have the same reaction. But there are a lot of people who are reading the book of Revelation who are from marginalized communities, right? Of which I am clearly not a member. I'm wearing a sport coat. They have a very different view of this. And there's one take in particular that is written by a scholar from South Africa. And I find it very chilling because he says it's easy to critique the violence from the comfort of a suburban home. But if you are somebody who has been through severe suffering and marginalization, that sometimes righteous anger is justified. And so I'm not trying to justify that, but it's a different way of looking at the problem. That's kind of more from the inside, but I trying to put yourself in that place of the people who are severely suffering is at least one different way of trying to get an angle on it.
Well, and the other coping mechanism you might have when you're struggling with this violent God is just saying, well, thank God I'll be on the righteous side.
Yeah, right.
There's this like deterministic view. It's like, oh, well, I'll be in the elect.
Yep.
And I won't be the grapes that are harvested and then crushed in God's wine press.
Right, yeah. Well, although even there's a problem, and there's a problem in the history of Christianity, because you maybe have heard of the idea of the rapture. And
that
the
comes
idea
from
is,
this book?
well, it really isn't in Revelation. Part of it more comes actually if you read like parts of 1 Thessalonians, other parts of Scripture.
That is a good trivia question, because I would have squarely put that in this book. Sorry.
Okay, good. Yeah. Well, I'm terrible at trivia, but unless it's on Revelation, maybe. But this idea of the rapture is, I think, a deeply problematic theological idea. Yes, the people who endure will be taken to the good place in the end. But we are not spared from the suffering. The idea of the rapture is sort of that there's a time and a point when God is going to vacuum the Christians off earth, and the worst of this, they will be spared. I don't really think you see that when you read the book closely, but you can understand the idea of the rapture as a way of trying to deal, like you said, with this problem. Well, at least the good guys are going to miss out on all of it. And I really don't think that's an accurate reading of the book. And I also think it's theologically problematic that somehow we would be spared from this this action of God.
You mentioned that this is not a prediction of the future, but did John think kind of the end times were coming soon, and that what he's imagining will happen to the Roman Empire was just around the corner?
He probably did. Or at least he severely, strongly hoped for it, right? We could say the same thing about Jesus, right? Sure. Jesus had a very vibrant expectation of God's imminent breaking into the universe. And here we are 2,000 years later. So maybe our sense of timing is off. Or maybe, again, it's a particular kind of worldview in literature that's a way of grappling with a present moment, and the timing of things is maybe less the point. But it's a very hard question. Yeah.
I have some more questions about some of the specific symbols, but before that, a meta question of sorts is, I feel somewhat dissatisfied with the way of reading this book, where you're just constantly looking to the footnote to be like, oh, what's the dragon actually supposed to be? Oh, what's the woman actually supposed to be? Mm-hmm. What are the four horsemen actually supposed to be? As if it is just like a translation thing. Like, oh, if I just look here, I'll figure out the real meaning. It's like one of those side-by-side Shakespeare works. You know what I'm talking about? Where
sure. Yeah.
It'll be modern English on one side and Shakespeare on the other. That feels like an inadequate way to read this, and I don't think that's really how symbols work generally. But I also don't know any other way to encounter this text.
Yeah. I think it's a great observation. I think maybe we need a little bit of a blend, right? We do want to at least initially anchor the text in its historical context so we understand what's going on. But you're right. Symbolism, and by its nature, is polyvalent, right? It can mean more than one thing at any given time. And so I think that's really important, because this book it's not meant to appeal to our rational brains. It's meant to appeal to our emotional, artistic, aesthetic side of our brains, right? And so we can't stifle that. I think that's very important. So that historical context is important, but also I do think maybe if you've got a basic understanding of the historical context, the imagery really can take on lots of beautiful meanings. And this is, again, why I appreciate teaching it so much, is almost every class, a student will have some insight that wow, I don't know that I've certainly never thought about it. I don't know that anybody has ever thought of it that way. And this isn't just crazy people making stuff up. It's very thoughtful, interpretations. So I think if the book is not at some level stimulating us emotionally and artistically, then we've kind of beaten the life out of it.
Hmm. That said, let's get into what the symbols mean.
Let's beat the life out of it.
Yeah. Maybe some of the big prominent ones, like Jesus's Lamb of God. That comes from this book primarily.
Yeah, it's also in the
correct?
Gospel of John. Yeah.
So maybe it was the same John.
Well, yeah, it's one of the main connections between those two, and it was probably partly how they got connected in the first place. But yeah.
But there's this idea that like John is expecting to see heaven and there be like something powerful, and he runs into a little lamb that's been slain.
Yeah.
Other big symbols, dragon. That's I think like the biggest stumbling block for a lot of people.
We got the dragon going after the woman and her baby.
The woman clothed with the sun.
That one's a little easier to understand what the symbolism of the woman and the baby are. But what's going on with that specific storyline?
Yeah. Well, what do you see as the symbolism there?
Oh, I assumed that was Mary and Jesus.
Yeah. Okay. And that's how most people take it. Of course, you're always going to find scholars who are trying to find some other argument. But those are two, I mean, amazing texts. The lamb, and this goes back to the violence question. When we talk about the violence in the book, this doesn't help all the problems, but nowhere in the book are humans empowered to enact violence. I think that's important. And like you said, when you get to the quintessential point of power in the whole book, it's a slaughtered lamb. And so at the center is a vision of utter weakness and helplessness. So there's an important irony there in the symbolism that I think needs to be put into conversation with the book's violence. That yes, there's problems with violence and how God instigates it. That does not mean we should learn the wrong lesson from how and why God is going through all of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think the woman clothed with the sun. It's a very powerful image. I mean, one of the big problems with this whole book is it has no real active roles for women. Even in that story in chapter 12, the woman clothed with the sun, she gives birth, the dragon comes after her, and her baby is immediately taken away from her, and she is just sort of like put in a closet.
A desert.
Right? Yeah, right, exactly, yeah. For a specific number of days. And the dragon tries to drown her, and the earth kind of swallows up the water. And it's a wild story. So there are some really interesting kind of feminist work being done in this book. Some of whom reject it outright, but also just sort of grappling with the fact that women in this book are either a spotless bride or a
whore of Babylon.
A whore of Babylon, yeah, right. I mean, that's the language. It's strong language, and the
I
woman
think that's
clothed
probably
with
one that a lot of people have heard of, the Whore of Babylon.
Yeah.
It's often applied to our dear church.
Yeah, specifically
From other
the Roman
Christians.
Catholic Church. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
how did that happen?
A lot of that goes back to the Reformation.
Because the Whore of Babylon is, represents the Roman
Represents
Empire.
Rome in the book,
Yeah.
and so in the Reformation, particularly in a lot of artistic representations. I mean, I think I don't know a lot about this off the top of my head, but I think Martin Luther uses this language of the Catholic Church at that moment, and you see it in the wood cuttings of like Albrecht Dürer, people like that, where the Pope is riding on the beast and is drinking the blood of the martyrs. The Pope is depicted like the Whore of Babylon. So a lot of it comes in the history of art as well. Yeah.
And I feel like this book has so many examples in history where people are ready to make a ready analogy to like this person is like the Whore of Babylon or the Antichrist or one of the horsemen of the apocalypse. What do you think that says about us, that we're just like ready to project sort of in a very literal sense meanings onto this book and its figures?
Yeah, I mean, at one level, it means we're bad readers and bad theologians, to be perfectly honest. I've already talked a little bit about how that's a problematic way of thinking about how the book creates truth. if I could just twist that a little bit, because the book does confront us with something today, something very serious. When you understand how it's critiquing empire, it does not allow for any half measures. You can't like have one foot in the empire and one foot in the church.
Yeah.
This book is so stridently anti-empire, it's all or nothing, right? I mean, this is why the language is so strong. If you are part of Rome, it is like sleeping with a, you know, I don't like saying the word, but
I'll say
we
it,
already
a
said it.
whore.
We already said, yeah, thank you. So that's the imagery that John uses. It's
Well,
all or nothing. And so when you take that into our modern world and you think about all of the ways in which, for myself as an American, the ways in which America functions as an empire globally, John is asking us to leave. I don't necessarily mean leave the country, but to leave the empire. And how do you even do that? And so the message of John that it really, if we really understood it and it confronted us with it, is almost unimaginable because of the total commitment to the church and to God rather than to political realities that it would ask of us.
Well, and I feel like Christians are still having that fight today about what is the proper relationship. Maybe not, but both to empire, but to culture and the dominant culture broadly. It's do we reject it entirely? Do we, as you said, have one foot in, one foot out? Is it our goal to convert the culture? And do we have to stay in the culture in order to convert it? I feel like that more than any specific issue is like what we're always arguing about. And so there is something I think interesting in reading this book and having that perspective is it's like that has been an open question since Jesus walked the earth and before that even, right?
Yep.
Because John clearly is targeting the empire, but also like other Christians who have like accommodated in different levels to living in and with the empire, correct?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. So, like in chapter 18, he talks about the merchants of the earth and all of the luxury goods that Rome is accumulating. This is really strong language about the kind of economic exploitation that Rome was engaging in to help fuel its empire. And anybody who's a part of it, this is what the 666 is all about as well. It's an economic marker that you need the mark of the beast, and it's a reference to Nero, to the Roman emperor. You need that mark to be able to buy or sell. It's an economic marker, and you, as a Christian, you can't go there. So you're right. But it's a tough debate because it's almost impossible to conceive unless you go, live in a hut somewhere.
Which some people do.
Some people do. I mean, this is, part of what launched the whole monastic revolution. So, come to St. John's. We got a little space in the monastery.
I want to talk about, you mentioned that humans don't seem to have a lot of agency in the book of Revelation. But like the animals and the earth and the sun and the stars are all characters. What you try to do with your book, Apocalyptic Ecology, is like kind of recover this story about the destruction of the earth in a way that impels us towards like care for creation, not just being like, oh well, it's going to be destroyed at the end of the world anyway, so we can just go on our merry way.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about kind of the agency of the earth and the sea in the book of Revelation? And what we should take.
Yeah, thanks for that question, because I love thinking about this. I mean, the book of Revelation uses the word earth 82 times, way more than any other book in the Bible. That alone is just fascinating. And so the earth and the whole cosmos is caught up in the drama of salvation. This is not unique to John, right? I think you get the sense in Romans chapter 8 when Paul talks about all creation is groaning. And you see this, I think, in the Psalms sometimes. You see it in some of the prophets that the earth and the whole universe is caught up in God's action. What is different in Revelation is sort of the magnitude of the destruction. And so that's deeply problematic in a certain way. But also, like you said, the agency. The four creatures that are flying around the throne in chapter 4 are the leaders. They lead, and the 24 elders follow them in worshiping God. So there's something very beautiful and powerful about that they are, well, one of them is like a human, but they are the vanguards in being ahead of humans in what we should do. The earth swallowing up the water that's meant to drown the woman clothed with the sun in chapter 12. This is a remarkable agency given to the earth in this whole drama, as it's almost as if Michael was fighting the dragon and didn't see the water going, and the earth is like, I got that. I'll take care of that part, right? I mean, it's really fascinating. But one of the really important things, I think, for the takeaway there is just the way in which we cannot separate ourselves or our lives from the very specific place in which we live. We are creatures created in a particular place at a particular moment in time, and we are completely dependent upon the environment we have been given and in which we live. And these are things that God also takes into consideration as part of the destiny for the universe. It sounds dramatic, but that's really kind of the scope of what John is envisioning here. And so the destruction in Revelation is a problem, but it's partly a result of the way in which Rome has so completely and thoroughly infected the universe that God feels like, oh, to use the language of my students, I have to rage quit. Right? We gotta start over. If that makes sense, right? In my book, I use this image of, sometimes I don't know if you ever play the board game Risk, right? Millions of pieces, and it takes hours and hours, and I'm playing with my kids. We've invested half a day in this, and then one of my kids sort of realizes, well, I think I'm going to lose. And so what does he do?
Flips the board. Rage
Flips
quits.
the board. Exactly. Game over.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to get this phrase exactly correct from your book, but it was something like John's engaging in like a competition of imaginations, and like the claims that the Roman Empire made in terms of their dominion over the earth, over people, over the economy was so outlandish that John had to create like a really even more outlandish scenario involving earthquakes and falling suns and dragons and all of that in order to kind of like make the point.
Yeah. No, that's right. John in the book of Revelation gets critiqued because all he does is kind of it's like Rome on steroids, right? And I think that's a legitimate critique of what he does. He takes the language, the images, the kind of propaganda that Rome does, and just tries to outdo Rome. It also has fueled across the centuries problems, because if all John is doing is creating a new empire, but just one that's Christian, in the hands of the powerful, then we've got a problem, right? That makes sense if you're marginalized and suffering, but once you're the one holding the sword, if you don't understand the origins of the book, it simply becomes a mouthpiece for you to perpetuate the violence.
So after all of the plagues and dragon fighting and horsemen of the apocalypse, the book does kind of end with the vision of the New Jerusalem, and I don't know, it feels like a calm, it maybe hopeful note that the book ends on. I'm curious what you think the sort of message at the conclusion is, and maybe like what's a helpful way generally for us to read this in church today.
To take us deep into the weeds, just very briefly, but one of the lines at the beginning of the last two chapters, it says, most translations say, behold, I make all things new. It's a quotation from Isaiah. The Greek there really, the first word is new. And you could also translate that phrase as, behold, I make all new things. And so there's this...
It's very different.
It's very different, yes.
Yeah.
And to me, I try not to be the kind of scholar who just like argues for one thing and not the other thing. I think this is a perfect time for a Catholic both and. We need to see the way in which this new world is a total radical reset, a starting over. Because if we don't recognize that, then we don't recognize the depth of the critique of our current world that John spends most of the book trying to get us to see, to reveal for us. However, if it's a complete reset, then we have no role at all. What do? We just sit and wait until God pushes the button.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a problem. So if we can kind of hold both of those in tension, it's both a reset, but also a transformation. There's some continuity between old and new. I think that's important for kind of our theological recovery of the future. I do think also the vision of the future there, obviously it's a reinterpretation of Genesis, right? You have one tree and you have one river from which all the people are going to eat. The people who are lucky enough to get there. That is also an image of such a radically different world than the one in which we live. The things we monetize are not monetized. Everything you need is available to you freely. That's radical. It's radical. And I think if we understand John, it's that the end is another place to start. It's a new Eden. And mostly that's God's work. I mean, it is God's work. But also it's our responsibility as Christians to be part of that new future. We can't just spend our time thinking, well, this is just something that's coming in the future. This is a space that is contested space in our world that it sounds kind of cheesy, but like we are responsible for making that a reality now. Heaven on earth. I don't like to say cheesy things, but that's kind of the idea, I think.
I think that's a great place to wrap up, and we'll sit with that thought on making heaven on earth on this Halloween.
Yes. First be a devil, and then you can be that.
Exactly. We do have one final question for you that we ask all our guests, and that is, if you
What year will the apocalypse come?
Yes. Yeah. If you were a betting man, I mean, just pull out my FanDuel app.
Yeah, right. We should get that going on FanDuel. That'd be great.
Sponsored by FanDuel. We've got a boosted parlay on the apocalypse coming.
Oh my gosh.
No, if you could canonize one person, living or dead, Catholic or not, fictional or real, who would it be and why?
I am going to say Sister Emanuel Renner. She was a mentor of mine here. She was a former president of the College of St. Benedict, led a study abroad trip that I was on back in the 90s, and just dramatically changed my life. So it's kind of a selfish answer because of what she did for me. But to me, she was my confirmation sponsor when I converted to become Catholic. And somebody who about at least once a week, I walk my dog to go visit her grave. So
I think that's a beautiful answer. I don't think you need to feel selfish about, I think that's such like,
it occurred to me halfway through. It's like, oh, that's about me.
It's such a funny thing though. Like some people have that reaction when we ask this question, and it's like, no, like, first of all, we don't actually have the power to do that on this show. Not yet. We're working on it. But I think it's a beautiful thing to canonize people that are close to you and have meant a lot to you like that. So her name one more time, Sister Emanuel Brenner?
Sister Emanuel Renner, Renner.
Yeah. Awesome. Pray for us. All right. The book is Apocalyptic Ecology, the Book of Revelation, the Earth and the Future, and it is by Dr. Micah D. Kiel. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today, Professor Kiel, and happy Halloween.
Yeah, same to you. Thank you very much. I deeply appreciate the work you both do, and just really appreciate it. So,
likewise.
Thank
Cheers.
you,
okay. All right. Thanks.
And now we have As One Friend Speaks to Another, the part of our show where we talk about where we're finding God in our lives and share stories of faith from across the Catholic Church.
And today we're joined by our colleague, Jackson Goodman, who is going to be with me on the New York City Marathon course this upcoming weekend. How you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I'm very excited for it. Excited to be here talking with you two about it right now.
And this is not your first marathon. You've done a couple this year.
Done a couple. Yeah. This will actually be the third of the year, third of the calendar year, and fourth overall. So
Yeah. So wanted to bring you on today because you are, one, a better runner than I am, two, a better prayer than I am. So I'm really
you're
looking
giving me a lot of credit
I am.
right now.
So I'd love to just like tease or unpack a little bit about, because I've always felt that there is this connection between prayer or spirituality and running, or maybe all physical activity. But for me, I found it easier in the practice of running. I don't know if that resonates with you at all, or when did you get into running?
So I've probably been, I would say, officially into it for about 2.5 years. And I did not get there by myself. It was definitely some of my closest friends and mentors, actually, from Boston College, who were the first ones who introduced me to the sport around the time that I was graduating school and kind of looking for a way to continue feeling a sense of purpose athletically and doing things like that. That makes it sound like I played a sport in college. I did not. But I played club sports and intramurals and kind of other things.
Well, in college, you sort of have like a task. You have your purpose is very clear.
Sure.
In college.
Yeah.
And I think some people, it's easy to struggle with that right when you get out. And it's like, okay, now what? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I signed up for my first half marathon very shortly after graduating because 4 of my best friends were doing it. And I had about 10 days to prepare and just kind of embrace the mentality of feeling like post-grad life now, wanted to try something new, wanted to stay connected to these people, wanted to challenge myself. And the rest is kind of history from there.
That's interesting. Running for me is a very solitary activity. I played soccer
Same
in high
here,
school
yeah.
and college, not really in college, but so I think of it as like the thing I do alone. So I'm curious what it's like to have a running community.
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely have moments like that where I feel like I need to just be by myself and I'm able to kind of go for a run and disconnect and either clear my head or talk about things. In the way I kind of view it is out loud with God. I'm an external processor, so sometimes I'll be on a run if I have a lot on my mind and we'll start talking out loud to myself, so you get some weird looks on the West Side Highway as that's happening. But no, for me, running is definitely more about community than it is anything else. And I feel like,
I feel like these are these like two tensions in the church too, right?
Sure.
Like you have, there's this like go to the desert and be a monk impulse within the Christian tradition, and then obviously there's the communal aspect of what it means to be a Christian. And I feel like you find that in running too, and you found that in your own running communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having gone to Jesuit schools my whole life, Boston College and then Fordham Prep for high school, my faith has very much been informed by community and being with other people and reflecting in group settings and talking about how you're feeling out loud. So I think when I first started going on runs with people and it was a chance to connect and talk, we weren't, going at such a breakneck pace that we couldn't have a conversation. I think that was what initially made it feel like something I enjoyed being a part of.
I was thinking about my relationship with running, and I realized that so much of our work in the spiritual life, and particularly the Jesuit tradition, is to discern the voice of God from the voice of the evil spirit. And so many times the voice of the evil spirit is just like telling you things about yourself that like you'd never do this, you always do this, you're always this way, it'll never work out, or you're in a spiral, like no one's going to come help you. And when you're running, it's really easy to get into negative places like that where you're like, oh my God, I have however many miles left to go on this. I'm never going to finish. Why did I even think I could attempt this? I always do this. I always get ahead of my skis. But if you like are really bad with your self-talk, like you're going to have a really bad time, right, on the run. And I think conversely in the spiritual life, it's kind of the same thing. Like you have to learn to be a good coach and a good teammate to yourself in order to like progress.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I couldn't agree more. I think I've definitely had moments on runs where you get to a tough place, whether it's physical or mental. It's that feeling that you kind of described of, I don't think I can do this. And sometimes you can't in that moment. You need to stop, take a breath, reset. And I think that's taught me a lot because in races, when I've felt myself struggling or getting down on myself, I can kind of think back on those moments where I was having negative thoughts and it was that tough training run in Central Park when I was doing the hills. How was I able to calm myself down and turn it around? And I think, it very much relates to the spiritual component of you got to give yourself grace. You have to find a way to be positive. Doesn't mean not being realistic, but finding a way to kind of allow yourself the space to keep going. And sometimes you need to stop before you can go forward.
Yeah.
I want to hear more about what your prayer is like during running. I have to admit, I do not pray when I run. I listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
But it's not to say it's not a spiritual experience for me, because I think, I don't know, we live such disembodied lives. Like, I live my life on a computer, and like running is just like such a reminder that we are embodied souls, and like we should be grateful that we have these bodies that can do such incredible things, like even just running a mile. Like, how wonderful, what a great gift that is to have.
Outside, treadmill.
Yeah.
Completely different story.
Completely different
Completely
story.
different story.
Yeah, so I definitely like always feel more grounded, and like I'm better able to relate to other people and to God after a run. But I wouldn't say I pray during the run. So what's that like?
Yeah, totally. It definitely doesn't happen all the time for me. I think I mix in podcasts every once in a while. Sometimes I'll do music. I feel like more often than not, and I think music can be spiritual in a sense, whether you are just reflecting on the lyrics or whatever the case may be. But as I kind of mentioned before, there's sometimes when I feel like I have a lot on my mind and I just need to take out the headphones. And for me, it's a form of just kind of speaking out loud to myself, to God, about what's on my mind and why am I feeling this way. Well, this thing happened earlier and it's still, got some headspace for me, or I'm nervous about something that's going to happen next week. And so for me, it kind of looks like that examine-y way of just thinking about your days and what's on your mind in that moment. And then oftentimes for me, when I get things off my chest, I say them out loud, I'm able to process better. And then for me, I kind of view that as that conversation with God.
Because I, like Ashley, I do a lot of like solo running, it's almost time for me to give myself space to be bored. And like I need to do that. And I don't know, like more spiritual people will talk about like giving space for silence, but like I think you have to give space for silence and boredom in order to like listen to what God has to say to you in a lot of cases. So for me, it's like I listen to a lot of podcasts too, but sometimes I will just go with nothing and let try to keep my eyes open, like see what's in front of me. But then all of a sudden you notice your like mind is wandering, and the thing that like you've been putting off thinking about or praying about just kind of comes to the fore, which it's even as much as you want, if you don't have like, at least for me, like a task I'm doing, like if I just sat in my room and said, I'm going to sit here until I'm bored and start, like the temptation to grab the phone or go check something in the other room would just be too great that I don't know that I would succeed. I do know I wouldn't succeed.
Right. Cards on the table.
Yeah.
I feel that too. I think it's helpful to have running as the thing that is like mindless in a way, but you're moving your body. And I think there's a lot to be said about that and how that just kind of gets our brains going. And I've had moments too where I'll set out for a run and I'm listening to music or I'm just with my thoughts or whatever the case may be. And I kind of realize, wow, this was an effective way to clear my head. And then something pops up. So I think every run is different in that way. Kind of sounds like a cliche, but I think it's true. I think it depends a lot on your mood and your mentality going into it. Sometimes you are doing runs, if you're training for a marathon, that you don't necessarily want to do, but then that teaches you different things about discipline and what you're truly capable of. And I think there are spiritual elements to that as well.
I used to be really cynical at the running community. It seemed like there were always like runs for a cause. And it was like, can't we just like raise money for a cause without having to organize like a giant like race around it or something? But more time I've spent in the sport, I've come to appreciate like what a rallying event something like a race can be, even for the people not running. Like the New York City Marathon, you've got all kinds of people raising money for charities and people coming out on the street to watch strangers run because they just like know it's a lot of ordinary people trying to do a really hard thing. Really beautiful. And there is like this, I think there's a Christian element too, where there's like this suffering that you take on for something else.
Totally.
Feels like in a lot of ways. So I think it maybe comes naturally to Catholics that this is a thing we do. You're raising money as part of your New York City Marathon endeavors. Could you tell us about the group and mission you're raising money for?
Yeah. I'm raising money for the Cristo Rey New York High School, which is located in Harlem, not too far from us here in Midtown. And they are an incredible school. Viewers may or not may or may not be familiar with the Cristo Rey network of high schools, which essentially there are, I want to say, around 30 throughout the country. Don't quote me on that number, but they are rapidly growing, and it's essentially providing a Catholic private education to families of traditionally underprivileged backgrounds who may or may not have the means to a private education otherwise. And not all of the schools are Jesuit, but Cristo Rey, New York happens to be. But they're all Catholic, and they all are kind of founded on this model of the work-study program, where students will be in school for 4 days a week, and then one day there are different community or organizational partners where students will work 1 day a week, kind of a full-time 9-to-5 job as an internship to expose them to what it's like to be in the working world, and then also help to pay for the cost of their tuition. So we've actually had a couple Cristo Rey interns here with us at America. That's how I was initially introduced to the school and their mission, and I've gotten the chance to go to the school for some events and meet a lot of really good people. So it's a great mission and a lot of really good people over there.
No, I love the Cristo Rey model. I think it's one of the great inventions of the Society of Jesus.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we've not kept it to ourselves, and it's spread throughout the country and the global Catholic education network. But a very worthy cause.
Good luck to you both.
Thank
I will
you.
be one of those people cheering on the sideline. I need to think of what funny sign I can make.
Oh, there's got to be some good
There's
ones.
something.
Please send your ideas to Ashley
Yeah.
for Marathon Science.
We'll be on the lookout.
If you're interested in supporting Jackson and the Cristo Rey Network, we're going to put a link to that in our show notes.
Awesome.
But
you.
good luck on Sunday, man.
Absolutely. Same to you. Thank you
Thanks.
both.
Jesuitical is made by us, Sebastian Gomes, Will Gualtieri, and Kevin Christopher Robles. Faith formation provided by Father Eric Sundrup, S.J. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, or like the show on your favorite platforms. You can support Jesuitical by subscribing to America Magazine at americamagazine.org. I'm Ashley McKinless with Zach Davis. We'll see you next week.